Enjoy your time here and find peace in the stories we tell. If you liked the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. When I was young, I once secretly snuck into father's study, only to catch a little boy casually stepping on his favorite chair. He was even nonchalantly grinding ink over a newly finished painting and scribbling wildly all over it. I was shaking with anger, so I immediately grabbed his hand, intending to drag him to see father for judgment. Unexpectedly, during our struggle, he accidentally knocked over a candle stand. Coincidentally, an inkstone rolled down and smashed right onto the little boy's head, knocking him unconscious instantly. Both of us nearly perished in a sea of fire. I had to use every ounce of my strength to drag that dead, weight little boy outside. As soon as I looked up, I met the worried gazes of mother and father, and I was so scared I almost fainted. Father, who had never lost his temper before, rushed to hug the little boy and left without sparing me even half a glance. I, who had always been the apple of his eye, felt so aggrieved that I burst into tears, tugging at mother's sleeve to ask if that boy was father's illegitimate son. I was immediately smacked on the back of my head by mother, and ink smeared all over my face. The more I cried, the more I looked like a piece of black charcoal. When I looked in the mirror, I screamed miserably that I was disfigured. Afterward, everyone in the Prime Minister's manor knew that the right side of my face was pitch black. One person told 10 told 100, and finally, it became a rumor that I had been disfigured. Before long, the whole capital knew that the only daughter of Prime Minister Ron was disfigured, even though it was clearly just ink on my face. I cried while washing my face, not understanding why this ink was so hard to remove. My skin turned red, but it still would not come off. Father was so angry he intended to give me a sound beating, but fortunately, mother stopped him. He looked heart-brokenly at the study burned to ashes, and then at the ink stain on my face. That was an ink stick he had spent 10,000 silver taels to buy, and I had ruined it. Mother could not bear my wailing anymore, so she directly ordered the maids to stop washing, and told me to just wear a veil when going out, saying the ink would fade in a few months at most. The next day, I innocently wore the veil to go buy hairpins. Being seen by others only made the rumor of my disfigurement seem more authentic. I wanted to explain but felt powerless. Even the commandery princess, who usually disliked me, looked at me with eyes full of sympathy and did not even bother fighting over the hairpin with me anymore. It was not that I was pretending, but the quality of father's ink was simply too good. I wore that veil for a whole month. After that, I poked a hornet's nest and got stung on the cheekbone. Then I ate almonds and had an allergic breakout, and then I went out to play hide and seek and broke a tooth on the doorframe. It got to the point where mother began to suspect there was something wrong with my head, as clearly no other part of me was injured, yet disaster always struck my face. Thus, that veil just stayed stuck to my face. Father could only sigh deeply and say that appearance is most important for a girl, asking why I did not strive for it and instead acted like a boy. As for that little boy from years ago, I never saw him again. That incident was gradually thrown to the back of my mind. Until this year, the new emperor had just ascended the throne. I suspected he was too idle, as he suddenly issued a decree for my marriage. The saying goes that civil and military officials do not intermarry, yet my father is the prime minister, and the emperor decided to marry me to the great general. I wondered if he was not afraid of a rebellion, or if he trusted my father and the general too much. But the imperial decree had been issued, and no one dared to disobey. Rumor had it that the general went to the palace 3 or 4 times to request the emperor to retract the decree, but it was useless. I resigned myself to fate. Marrying anyone is still a marriage. I went around asking for information, stating I had no requirements for my future husband, as long as he was not an old man over 40. It turned out this general was named Thomas Wei. He followed his father to war at 13 and had just reached adulthood this year. He used many strange tactics on the battlefield, won countless battles, inherited his father's bravery, and was titled the Divine Marshal General by Emperor Vincent. Fortunately, he was not an old man. However, I heard a small piece of news that he was someone who placed great importance on looks. To make my future life smoother, I decided to let the general taste my true appearance. An opportunity arose, as the general would attend a banquet hosted by the emperor in 3 days. Fine then, the enchanting beauty would be me. I looked at myself dressed in magnificent clothes, feeling like a peacock spreading its tail to show off. Unexpectedly, my maid Daisy looked at me in a daze. I amusingly reminded her to wipe her drool. Daisy touched the corner of her mouth and blushed, saying that I was truly beautiful, and it was a pity outsiders did not know. She added that people kept rumors that the daughter of the minister was the #1 beauty in the capital, but in her eyes, that woman could not compare to even 1/10,000th of me. I rolled my eyes and told her to stop flattering me, saying this is called pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, and when necessary I would shock everyone. After laughing, I solemnly put on my veil and prepared to go to the banquet. Indeed, I calculated that Thomas would accidentally see my true face and fall madly in love with me. That way, after marriage, I could live the life I wanted. It is a pity that I was still too naive. As soon as the banquet began, the new emperor arrived slowly. He wore a pure white fur coat and walked leisurely to the high seat, smiling and telling the beloved officials to rise, apologizing for the wait. His young and heroic appearance was hard to believe. Emperor Vincent glanced around and sat down to sip his wine. I looked at the food in front of him, still steaming hot, and felt indignant that because he was so late, my food had gone cold, but that was not the most important thing. My eyes swept across the room and saw Thomas in a deep black official uniform. He was indeed not bad, looking quite handsome. I stared at him for the time of half an incense stick, until my eyes were sore, yet he did not even glance in my direction. I clenched my fists, thinking that I would charm him to death later, and tried to endure the cold food and boring entertainment. Finally, I saw Thomas leave the banquet and head toward the rear garden. I secretly followed him, but unexpectedly, while he might have gotten lost, I definitely got lost too. Just as I was burning with anxiety, the temperature suddenly dropped, and a strong wind picked up. I sneezed loudly, and suddenly, a gust of wind from nowhere blew my veil away and dust got into my eyes. At that moment, a pair of warm hands gently patted me. I jumped, momentarily panicked and unable to react, and blurted out asking who was there. My eyelids stung so much I could not open them, but the other person calmly comforted me, telling me not to panic and referring to himself as a humble servant. Upon hearing that form of address, my heart immediately settled down. I recognized this voice. It was Eunuch David, the head attendant beside the emperor. Eunuch David had always been a kind person, and there was some connection between him and my family. I endured the pain to curtsy, introducing myself as the only daughter of Prime Minister Ron. I explained that I was enjoying the scenery when the wind suddenly rose, blowing dust into my eyes so I could not see the way, leaving me trapped in the garden. I asked the eunuch to help find my veil and take me back to the banquet, otherwise father would be worried. After I finished speaking, there was a long silence opposite me. I could not help but sneeze again and softly called out to him. I only felt those warm hands gently helping me put the veil back on, and then he draped a thick fur coat over me. Eunuch David's steady voice told me to hold on to his arm, and he would take me back to the banquet. I breathed a sigh of relief and thanked him. After walking a short distance, I gradually heard the noise of the crowd. My maid Daisy saw Eunuch David supporting me from afar and rushed over, bowing to greet him and anxiously asking about my condition. As soon as Daisy took hold of me, Eunuch David instructed that I had gotten dust in my eyes in the rear garden, and should go wash them first. He told her to take me to the side hall, where warm water and medicine to prevent wind chill were already prepared, adding that he noticed I had caught a bit of a cold. I gripped Daisy's hand tightly, my tense nerves finally relaxing, and hurriedly bowed slightly to thank Eunuch David. By the time I had washed my eyes, drunk the bitter medicine, changed my clothes, and returned to the banquet, I saw Thomas sitting there calmly drinking wine. His rosy complexion made me so angry I wanted to die. How did he run so fast like an exploding firecracker? Meanwhile, I was in such a miserable state. I had intended to make Thomas fall in love at first sight, so I wore a flowing skirt made of fabric so thin I nearly froze to death, and the result was truly a total loss. While I was secretly complaining, I suddenly felt a burning gaze. I looked up and saw Emperor Vincent looking at me with a meaningful expression. My scalp went numb, not understanding why he was looking at me. It was only then that I realized the fur coat on the emperor was missing. Panic surged in my heart. Had Eunuch David secretly stolen the emperor's fur coat in the rear garden? Then seeing me appear, tried to frame me for his crime. I involuntarily slapped my forehead, blaming myself for not looking closely at the style of that coat. Fortunately, I had thrown it into the side hall. I secretly glanced at the emperor with a smug look, but unexpectedly, his eyes became even deeper. He then called eunuch David to his side and whispered something, and a sense of foreboding rose in my heart. The emperor lazily sat on the high seat and called out for Prime Minister Ron. The noisy hall instantly fell silent. My father walked tremblingly to the center of the hall and knelt down to pay respects. The emperor said nothing, only silently watching my father. The atmosphere in the hall was so quiet that even the sound of a needle dropping could be heard. I even saw the Grand Tutor and the Minister of Personnel, my father's mortal enemies, winking at each other. Sweat poured down my father like rain. My hair stood on end, wondering what this dog emperor was up to. Just when the atmosphere was almost suffocating, the emperor propped his chin up, chuckled softly, and said that today he had met an old friend he had not seen for a long time, who was also his savior. He asked my father how he should reward her. I listened in confusion. Looking at father, it seemed that in a split second he understood something. The families of the officials in the hall also looked at each other and whispered, everyone curious about who the old friend the emperor mentioned was. My father kowtowed and said that it was difficult for him to make a decision on this matter. The emperor suddenly asked a completely unrelated question, asking why my father was so nervous. He said he did not claim my father was the benefactor, only that the benefactor was shy. He stated that the kingdom of Lili had recently paid tribute with many rare treasures, so he would bestow those upon his benefactor, and asked Prime Minister Ron to trouble himself to deliver them on his behalf. I stole a glance at the emperor. He maintained his lazy posture, simply said he was tired, and stood up to leave the great hall. My father remained kneeling in the center of the hall, motionless. As soon as the emperor left, the hall immediately buzzed with discussion, and curious and gloating eyes were all cast toward my father. It looked as if he had offended the emperor, until eunuch David gently waved his handkerchief. The palace gates opened, and a group of young eunuchs carried in large chests filled with gold, silver, and jewels. It took nearly the time of an incense stick to finish carrying them in, and the entire great hall was so dazzling with golden light that it almost blinded me. I stood there stunned, unable to help but think that this dog emperor really had a problem with his head. Did he have money and not know where to spend it? Eunuch David hurriedly helped my father up and whispered a few words in his ear. My father's expression was complicated, but he could only nod in agreement. The eyes in the hall became even more curious, and some ministers even secretly inquired about who the emperor's benefactor truly was. I even suspected these people were acting, as their expressions changed constantly. The story of my father returning to the manor with 5 carts of gold, silver, and jewels spread throughout the capital in no time. This was especially true for Vicky Yu, the daughter of the Minister of Personnel, who always mocked me as an ugly woman. At the banquet that day, she had spewed a basket of insults, but I just picked my ear and treated it as a dog barking, which made her stomp her feet in humiliation and anger. The capital was momentarily filled with rumors that my father knew the emperor's savior. Everyone wanted to know who that mysterious benefactor was, and the threshold of our house was nearly trampled by visitors. However, as soon as my father returned to the manor, he used a serious illness as an excuse to close the doors for several days. When he recovered, he hurriedly entered the palace. He left at the break of dawn and did not return until dusk. When mother asked, father would not say anything. I only saw him despondent and sorrowful, with a heavy appearance. It had been a long time since I had seen my old father sigh repeatedly like that, and whenever his eyes met mine, they became even more gloomy. Not long after, the very next day, I heard news that the barbarians in the northwest had recently become aggressive. The emperor immediately issued a decree ordering Thomas to lead a campaign to suppress the northwest within a few days. The wedding date, originally scheduled for next month, was therefore postponed indefinitely. I thought it over and finally decided to go to the temple to pray for a peace amulet, wanting to personally give it to Thomas. I heard he was at the military training ground, so I hurried over. From a distance, I saw him standing and talking to a woman. Before I could get close, I was blocked by soldiers at the gate, who coldly shouted that idlers were not allowed to enter. Daisy was so angry her face turned red, and she shouted back, telling them to open their eyes and look carefully. She declared that I was the young lady of the Prime Minister's manor, the general's unwed fiancée. Upon hearing this, the soldier not only showed no respect but also laughed contemptuously, saying, So this is the arrogant young lady who separated the general and the strategist. She is so weak that the wind could blow her over. She had better not come near this training ground, where swords and blades have no eyes. He added, she'd better be careful, lest some commoners accidentally hurt the noble young lady, and get beheaded by the Prime Minister. Daisy was about to snap back, but I pulled her hand and smiled softly, saying we would just stand there and wait for General Thomas. The argument on our side was not quiet, and Thomas had already looked over. He first frowned deeply, said a few words to the woman, and then led her over to us. The woman shouted at the soldier, ordering Soldier Zhao to retreat and not be rude. The soldier reluctantly stepped aside, giving us a glare. Daisy stood next to me, about to explode with anger. I pulled her back, looked at Thomas, and asked who this was. Before Thomas could open his mouth, the woman was a step faster, cupping her fists to me and introducing herself as the general's strategist, named Wendy Mu. After speaking, she smiled radiantly at Thomas and gently said that since Miss Ruan had something to say, she would excuse herself to the tent. Thomas raised his hand to stop her, saying, "Wendy, you do not need to go. Miss Ruan can say whatever she has to say right here." I forced a smile. Just hearing that form of address was enough to understand that between Thomas and Miss Mu, there was indeed mutual affection. I had become the villain separating the lovebirds, but the Emperor's decree was not something the two of us could defy. The last glimmer of hope in my heart was extinguished. The peace amulet in my sleeve suddenly felt scorching hot. I felt that if I really married Thomas, my future days would hardly be peaceful. Seeing that I had not spoken for a long time but only smiled awkwardly, Daisy sarcastically remarked that her lady knew the general was going to war, and came to the temple to pray for a peace amulet to give him, only to find the general with a beauty by his side, pitying her lady's devoted heart. Thomas's face immediately darkened, and he shouted that it was nonsense, stating that Wendy was a strategist, not an ordinary woman. Wendy, however, calmly told him, "It is all right." My mouth twitched as I watched the two of them acting like characters in a play right in front of me. I glanced at Daisy with a warning look for that damned girl, then spoke up to apologize, saying that Daisy spoke without thinking and hoping the general and strategist would not take it to heart. I said I was just idly walking around and dared not delay the general's time, then bade farewell. I was just about to drag Daisy, who looked disappointed in my lack of ambition, away when Thomas called out from behind for me to stop. I turned back to see him reaching out his hand, asking where his peace amulet was. I froze for a moment. Seeing Wendy's stiff expression, I sneered inwardly. I had thought Thomas was a decent person, but I did not expect him to flirt with others while his beloved was standing right next to him. I pretended to be apologetic and said, "I am sorry, General Thomas. I have lost the peace amulet. Why not let strategist Mu pray for one for you?" After speaking, I casually tossed the peace amulet I had prayed for early that morning into a pile of dry grass nearby and turned to leave. 2 days later, Thomas wrote to me, saying he had just learned I misunderstood his relationship with Wendy. He claimed they were just colleagues and wanted to apologize personally, asking me to wait for him at the Hongyun Tower, where he would treat me to a meal. I was originally too lazy to care, but thinking that the engagement still existed. If he really had feelings for Wendy, it would be good to clarify things at this meal, so that even if we married, we could live our separate lives. Holding that thought, I arrived at Hongyun Tower earlier than planned, but I waited in the private room from noon until evening without seeing a trace of him. I stood up. I gripped my chopsticks tightly, grinding my teeth. I was just about to stand up and leave when I saw Thomas arrive late. Before I could express my grievance, I saw that Wendy was with him. I immediately bristled like a hen ready for battle, my expression turning stern. I straightened my back, held my head high, and walked forward. Thomas looked full of guilt, repeatedly bowing with his hands clasped to apologize. Before he could finish speaking, Wendy smiled and apologized to me first. She said that Thomas did not intend to be late. It was only because she had accidentally injured herself today, and Thomas, being uneasy, insisted on inviting a doctor, which caused the delay. She made it sound as if I could beat or scold her if I were angry. The fury within me instantly soared to the heavens. I did not know if it was grievance or anger, but my heart felt cold as I thought, "Very well, Thomas, even if you have no feelings for me, you should at least know how to respect others." I sneered, replying that I was not some shrew who would beat or scold people at will. I then turned to Thomas and said, "Thomas, you are a dignified great general. Since you asked me out, you cannot break your word. I have waited here for you for a long time. Do you expect me to let it go with just a perfunctory apology? Just how thick is your face? If you are dissatisfied with me, just say it straight. I am not some dog skin plaster that must stick to you, so why humiliate me like this? Thomas's face turned alternately green and red. Conversely, Wendy spoke up with a sorrowful expression, apologizing to Thomas and claiming it was all her fault. Thomas glanced at her with heartache and said in a deep voice that this matter had nothing to do with Wendy, and that he had not handled it properly. He told me that if Miss Ron had any dissatisfaction, I should vent it all on him, and he would personally come to the Prime Minister's manor another day to plead for forgiveness. I was so angry my liver ached, and I cursed this damned marriage bestowed by the dog emperor in my heart. I did not bother to pay attention to Thomas calling after me. I just walked away decisively without looking back. Unexpectedly, Wendy suddenly cried out in pain behind me, and Thomas's footsteps, which were rushing toward me, immediately halted. I clearly heard his anxious voice asking about her well-being, so I directly boarded my carriage and returned to the manor. Early the next morning, Thomas came knocking at the Prime Minister's manor, saying he wanted to apologize to me. The funniest part was that he carried a thorn branch on his back, causing a crowd of commoners to gather and watch at our gate. My father welcomed him in. I had not told my father about these troubles yet, fearing he would worry. Father just thought I was being pettish, so he called me out to meet him. I originally did not want to see him, but I had no choice when father said Thomas had brought the sugar, roasted chestnuts from the west side of the city that I liked best. I dragged Daisy along, intending only to watch Thomas make a fool of himself, but truthfully, watching this spectacle was absolutely for the sake of the chestnuts. Arriving at the front hall, I saw Thomas bowing his head dejectedly. The thorn branch had already caused his back to bleed. My father winked at me, whispering to ask how Thomas had offended me. I momentarily did not know how to answer. Thomas stood below, clumsily apologizing to me, and then slowly took out a wooden hairpin from his sleeve. I tilted my head in confusion, asking the general what this meant, and why he was giving me a piece of dry wood. Thomas immediately blushed and stammered that he had carved this wooden hairpin all night as an apology to Miss Ron. Looking at his awkward appearance, I could not help but chuckle, but the scene of him and Wendy joining forces to deceive me was still fresh, so I asked sternly if strategist Mew would be angry, jealous, or hit me if he gave me such a hairpin. Thomas hurriedly shook his head, explaining that I had misunderstood, as he had never carved a hairpin for Wendy. He said Wendy had been an orphan since childhood, whom he picked up from a pile of refugees, and seeing she had strategic talent, he made an exception to promote her to strategist. Having lived together for many years, he only regarded her as a biological younger sister. I looked coldly at the hairpin in his hand without accepting it, but my sharp eyes noticed a familiar thin string around his neck. I immediately leaned in and pulled the string out. My fingertips accidentally brushed past his neck, and I saw that it was the very peace amulet I had thrown on the ground. Thomas instantly turned as red as a boiled shrimp. Seeing him like this, the harsh words I intended to say could not leave my mouth. He stammered, and I remained speechless for a long time. Just then, Wendy entered to report that it was time for Thomas to set out for the campaign. The relaxed atmosphere instantly vanished, and Thomas's expression became solemn. He said he had to go and hoped Miss Ron could forgive him and accept the hairpin. It turned out that the day of his departure for war had arrived without me realizing it. I pursed my lips tightly. Although Thomas was a scumbag in matters of romance, the fact that he rushed to the battlefield to protect the country still commanded my respect. Wendy looked at the wooden hairpin in my hand with a pale face. A belly full of bad ideas immediately sprang up in my heart. I pretended to wipe away a non-existent tear and said that I accepted the hairpin he carved himself. I told Thomas that he must return safely. He nodded solemnly, took a deep look at me, and turned to leave. Wendy followed closely behind him. Who knows how long she had been eavesdropping outside the door. She turned her head to glare at me viciously. I mouthed back to her, asking if that was all she had. Snow fell for 2 months. Since Thomas left the capital, both inside and outside the palace were peaceful. That emperor with the problematic head also temporarily caused no strange trouble. As I ate hot pot and watched the white snow flying like goose feathers outside the window, I suddenly thought of Thomas. I did not know what illness he had contracted, but instead of being intimate with his beloved younger sister, he frequently sent me small toys from the Northwest along with letters. I had never been to the Northwest, so looking at those items felt novel. I would take them out to admire when I was idle. For the sake of etiquette, I still wrote letters in reply. After all, he was my fiancé. If he was alive, it was fine, but if he died, I would become an unmarried widow. I really did not want a chastity archway erected for me at the city gate. A few days later, Consort Sarah organized a plum blossom viewing banquet, inviting many noble ladies. When I arrived, my hand was rotating 2 small walnuts. I heard Thomas say that old men in the Northwest all held these things and rotated them in their hands. He found it interesting, so he sent them to me. The noble ladies had all arrived, missing only Consort Diana. Consort Sarah and Consort Diana had always been at odds. As soon as Consort Sarah saw Consort Diana arriving slowly and late, she sarcastically remarked that Sister Donna really had airs to make everyone wait so long. Consort Diana walked gracefully, lightly touching the hairpin on her head, and pursed her lips in a smile, saying that His Majesty rested at her place last night, so it was unavoidable that her body was tired, causing her to wake up late. Consort Sarah's face immediately turned unsightly, and she coldly snorted, mocking that she did not know what witchcraft Consort Diana had learned to make the Emperor linger every day. It was truly quite a method. Consort Diana glanced sideways and pouted contemptuously, replying that there were many sisters in the harem, but many were old and their beauty had faded, and since the Emperor had not selected new consorts for years, did he not always come to her place? Consort Sarah was so angry her chest heaved. Having seen enough of the excitement, I had no interest in reciting poetry, so I just wanted to find a quiet place to rest for a while. I wrapped my thick fur coat around me, hugged a hand warmer, and took advantage of the chaos to sneak out. After walking for a long time, I saw a small pavilion and sat down, lazily watching the snow drift down. I reached out to catch a snowflake, and a thought suddenly flashed through my mind. I packed a snowball, saw Daisy looking blankly around, and threw it straight at her. She froze for a moment and then flopped down onto the snow. I was suddenly startled and hurriedly ran a few steps toward her. Unexpectedly, before I could reach her, a large snowball smashed right onto my head. I paused and saw that Daisy was now giggling, packing snow while looking at me. I put my hands on my hips and scolded her, saying she dared to trick me, and she would see how I dealt with her. The two of us ignored whether anyone was around and just rushed into a snowball fight right in front of the pavilion. The wind blew my face red, but I felt strangely happy, thinking this was much more fun than a poetry gathering. I packed a really big snowball. Seeing Daisy bowing her head busy packing snow, I took the chance while she was off guard to swing my arm and throw it. I only heard a thud. Daisy cried out and dodged, but the snowball did not miss its mark at all. It squarely hit a set of bright, dazzling yellow robes. Eunuch David shouted, "Bold!" That snowball had smashed right onto the Emperor. I immediately knelt down in panic, my voice trembling as I paid respects and asked the Emperor for forgiveness. The Emperor looked full of murderous intent, scolding that making such a ruckus in the palace was improper. I was a bit tense, and Daisy kowtowed, repeatedly begging for mercy, saying it was all her idea to have a snowball fight. Seeing Daisy's forehead already swollen, a fire rose in my heart. Clearly he appeared suddenly, yet he blamed others. I could not help pouting and looked up at the Emperor. Unexpectedly, he seemed amused by my fierce look, narrowed his eyes, waved his hand to tell me to stand up, and said that the death penalty could be exempted but punishment could not be avoided. He said since I wet his clothes, I had to compensate him with a set. What kind of nonsense was that? I stood there blankly like a fool, then hurriedly said I could not compensate with clothes, so it would be better to compensate the Emperor directly with silver tails. The Emperor's clothes were all custom, made by the embroidery workshop, where every stitch was precious. The Emperor wanted me to compensate for clothes, so wouldn't exchanging it for silver be enough? Eunuch David scolded again, saying I was bold to humiliate the Emperor, asking if the Emperor lacked my bit of silver. While I was angry and embarrassed, the Emperor suddenly changed his tone, saying that if I could not compensate with clothes, then I should use myself as compensation. I was immediately terrified and frantically replied that it would not work. I said my appearance was ugly and I had been disfigured, I had no learning and no skills, and all day I only knew how to tease cats and dogs. I added that my father even said if the Emperor had not bestowed the marriage, I would not have been able to get married. Furthermore, the Emperor had a heavenly appearance and extraordinary martial prowess, so I was unworthy. Seeing me degrade myself like this, the Emperor laughed heartily, asking if he was truly that excellent in my heart. Then he said fine, he would not tease me anymore, and told me to accompany him for a walk. As soon as the words fell, Eunuch David suddenly pulled Daisy, who was about to stand up, and led her away. My nerves were as tight as a bowstring. In broad daylight, surely the Emperor would not do anything improper. I tightened the fur coat around me. I was just about to open my mouth when I saw a flash of disgust on the Emperor's face. He asked what was wrong with me, then said to rest assured, my maid was fine. He had instructed the attendants to take her to apply medicine, and told me to keep up. I took 3 steps and turned my head to look at Daisy being carried far away, fear lingering in my heart. The Emperor suddenly pulled me, and I stumbled, nearly falling flat on my face. I cursed the dog Emperor several times in my heart, greeting his whole family, thinking he would not even let an ugly woman off. After walking a bit further, the Emperor suddenly stopped. I was momentarily stunned and could not break in time, slamming into his broad back. I was just about to apologize when he made a hushing sound and pulled me to hide in the artificial mountain. I was just about to speak when I heard the voices of a man and a woman drifting over. The woman was both afraid and angry, saying, "Why did you come? Do not be like this, be careful of being discovered." That voice was Consort Diana. My ears were sharp and recognized it immediately. The man referred to himself as this prince, saying he missed her to death. He complained that in recent days, his imperial brother was in her room every day, leaving him no chance to find her, and accused her of forgetting his goodness now that she had his imperial brother's company. The man called himself this prince. So I did not know which bold Prince Nathan he was, but hearing such an ugly royal secret made me shake like a sieve. The Emperor seemed to think I was cold, so he used his large fur coat to cover me, leaving only my furry head exposed. I stole a glance at Emperor Vincent with an emotionless face, silently lighting incense for Consort Diana in my heart, and could not help but sympathize with the Emperor. At this moment, I found the Emperor even more pitiful than myself. The Emperor looked pitiful, the green hat on his head was practically glowing. Consort Diana moaned softly, saying that when the Emperor came to her place, he only drank tea and played chess, and she did not understand why he would not even touch her. Then those 2 people walked closer and closer to our direction. My body was tense to the extreme, the footsteps were right in front of us, and I almost wanted to scream. The 2 suddenly stopped, seemingly right behind the artificial mountain in front of us, and then a series of strange sounds rang out. My expression was chaotic, I could only stare at the Emperor's chest. I sat demurely with my eyes lowered, constantly chanting in my heart for this to pass quickly. Who knows how much time passed before my legs were so numb I lost feeling. Only then did those 2 leave the artificial mountain. I breathed a sigh of relief and looked up, only to see the Emperor right in front of my face, looking at me with a smile that was not quite a smile. Even more hateful was that his face was getting closer and closer to mine. When I looked up, I almost kissed him. My face flushed red instantly, and instinctively I pushed the Emperor. When I reacted, my face immediately turned pale. However, the Emperor hugged me, his voice hoarse as he said, "I am sorry, I did not mean to." I was on the verge of tears. I already had a fiancé, yet the Emperor treated me like this. What did he consider me to be? Indeed, my mother was right, there isn't a single good man in the world. Just then, a snowflake flew into my eye, and tears welled up involuntarily. The Emperor, on the contrary, suddenly became flustered. He immediately let go of me, his hands and feet clumsy as he wiped my tears, saying, "Do not cry, it is my fault. I was rude, please do not cry." I was speechless in my heart, but still went with the flow and burst into tears, crying while asking if the Emperor would punish me. The Emperor looked amused and said he would not. It was only then that I discovered he had pulled off my veil while wiping my tears. I started to narcissistically think, did he discover my beautiful appearance and want to seize me by force? The result was that the dog Emperor almost angered me to death. He said, "Don't cry anymore. Looking at you cry, snot bubbles are coming out, you are as ugly as the little black dog I met when I was young." I choked right then and there, cursing wildly in my heart. Am I not a big beauty standing right here, yet you cannot see? I blurted out, "I think it is not that Consort Diana has a private affair, but that you can't do it." The dog Emperor's face instantly turned black. I suddenly covered my mouth. Oh mother, why did I say my inner thoughts out loud? Father, I am sorry. 9 generations of my family, I am sorry. The Emperor ground his teeth and gripped my wrist tightly, saying, "Sooner or later, I will let you know whether I can do it or not." The final result was that in my panic, I accidentally kicked the Emperor, So on the way back to the manor, I only thought about the execution of my 9 generations. I even had nightmares for several days, dreaming that I was beheaded, and had long thrown the matter of Consort Diana's affair to the back of my mind. Recently, due to the snow disaster, the Emperor was very busy, and we did not meet again. That was good. My 9 generations were safe. I often saw Consort Diana acting smug at banquets. Each time I felt uncomfortable, always feeling stifled. Until early spring, news came from the palace that Thomas had won the battle and would return to the court the day after tomorrow. I embroidered a scented sachet, wanting to give it to Thomas when he returned. After all, I had received so many small items from him, though he never replied to the letter I wrote. The day after tomorrow arrived quickly. I decided to observe first, so I arrived early at the roadside where people were already standing in 2 rows. The man leading the way against the light wore a set of silver armor. Both sides of the road were filled with cheers, and there were even many women on the second-floor balconies throwing handkerchiefs down. I watched Thomas getting closer and closer, desperately waving my hand, when I suddenly realized there was a woman riding the same horse with him, and he was holding the reins very tightly. I looked closely. Oh my, wasn't that woman with a face as red as a monkey's bottom our great strategist Mu? Is this the general? Truly mighty? Yes, so handsome. Is that woman the female strategist from the legends? A talented man and a beautiful woman. I am so envious. The general is so handsome. If I could also fight on the battlefield with him, how good that would be. Keep dreaming. Listening to 2 women discussing beside me, I hurriedly hid to the side, very afraid of being recognized. Unexpectedly, I had worried too much. Thomas just passed right before my eyes. Miss, I told you General Thomas and that Wendy had an affair. When the Emperor bestowed the marriage, he even wanted to break it off. Embracing in public like this, they truly have no sense of shame. Daisy spat contemptuously. I also made sarcastic remarks from the side. That's right, and he still said he only treated her as a biological sister. Humph. The main characters had already gone far, so there was nothing left to watch. I just turned my head and bumped into someone's chest. Ouch. I held my head. Why was this person so hard? I was just looking up to get angry when I saw a familiar face. Daisy was beside me stuttering, Emp. Eunuch David immediately covered her mouth and explained, that's right, this is my Master Huang. I smiled to smooth things over. Master Huang, please make way, I want to go home. The Emperor acted deaf. Not only did he not let me go home, but he also tugged at my sleeve. Seeing his hand about to reach over, I was terrified he would do something rash to me again, so I dragged Daisy and turned to run. As I ran, I turned back and saw the Emperor's mouth twitching. The general has arrived. Finally he is here. General Thomas walked past me, pausing for a brief moment. It was not in vain that I started applying makeup in the afternoon. Does he regret it? Regret is useless. I am no longer the Miss Ron of the Prime Minister's manor. I am Mila Ron, the one who has returned for revenge. I clutched the scented sachet to my chest, craning my neck and staring expectantly at the entrance, wondering what great drama there was to watch today. Thomas had changed into a set of deep black official robes. He seemed to have lost weight. He strode in and paid respects to the Emperor. Emperor Vincent sat high above, laughing heartily and waving his large hand, saying, "Rise quickly. Beloved official Wei is a meritorious minister of our dynasty, having conquered 2 cities in the northwest for me." Thomas clasped his hands and hurriedly said, "This general dares not accept the credit. It is all thanks to the Emperor's wisdom. It is the fortune of this general and the luck of the common people." The Emperor laughed heartily. "So, what reward does my beloved official want? Speak, and I will grant it." The Emperor smiled knowingly. "I feel like you are thinking of something mischievous." Thomas knelt in the center of the hall. "Your Majesty, I have a girl in my heart whom I fell in love with at first sight. I beg your Majesty to retract the marriage engagement between me and the daughter of Prime Minister Ron." Immediately, all eyes turned toward me and my father. Only Thomas kept his head bowed. I suddenly felt annoyed and uncomfortable in my heart. I made up my mind that when I returned, I would sell all the trinkets Thomas had sent me at a cheap price. Right before he returned, I had even thought that if he respected me, it would not be impossible for us to treat each other with mutual respect as guests. At this moment, I was still wearing that ugly wooden hairpin on my head. Just before Thomas entered, the commandery princess had even laughed at me for being a country bumpkin, wearing a tree branch on my head. At this moment, the group of arrogant people led by the commandery princess was looking at me with gloating expressions. On the outside, I appeared calm and indifferent, and inside I was just as calm, thinking to myself that they simply did not understand this sister's tactics. The emperor made a sound of surprise and asked, "Prime Minister Rohan, what do you think of this matter?" My father's face became even more severe. "Your Majesty, you have already spoken. A gentleman's word is like a team of 4 horses that cannot be chased back. General Thomas demands a retraction as soon as he returns. This minister finds it inappropriate." The emperor looked full of murderous intent, seemingly deep in thought. I looked at Thomas with an expectant expression, just waiting for the great show to begin, but he kept his head down and did not even bother to look at me. Without thinking, I stepped forward and said, "Reporting to Your Majesty, this subject's daughter agrees to annul the engagement, but I have a few words I wish to ask General Thomas." My father glared at me and scolded, "Bold. Return to your seat immediately. Your Majesty, this minister has failed to teach his daughter properly." The emperor interrupted my father, saying, "I permit it." I looked at Thomas and asked word by word, "General, is the person in your heart Wendy?" He said yes. I pretended to be heartbroken and heavily struck. "General, did you not say she was only your younger sister?" He replied that Wendy had saved him when he was seriously injured. Everything happened because of him, so he had to take responsibility. He said if it was not her, he would not marry, and he had even promised her a life together as a devoted couple. I pursed my lips and asked, "Does a life saving grace mean you must repay it with your body? By that logic, I saved a little boy when I was young, must I force him to marry me too? What about addressing each other as brother and sister? I see that you two were never innocent to begin with. If the engagement is to be annulled, fine. But it is I who am annulling you." He only whispered, "I am sorry." I found it ridiculous. With one hand, I yanked the wooden hairpin from my head and threw it down in front of him, saying to the emperor, "This subject daughter Mila wishes to annul the engagement with General Thomas today. I beg your Majesty to grant this." The emperor narrowed his eyes at the wooden hairpin with a look of disgust. "Beloved official Wei is a great meritorious minister after all. I must not only reward him but reward him heavily. If neither of you is satisfied with the first bestowed marriage, I do not wish to see a pair of resentful spouses, so I will retract the marriage decree. In its place, I will personally issue 2 new decrees. The first decree is that I shall bestow a marriage between beloved official Wei and Miss Mu. The date shall be determined by the Bureau of Astronomy. Beloved official Wei, are you satisfied?" Thomas listened and heavily kowtowed once. "Many thanks to your Majesty." The emperor continued, "I just saw that what Miss Ron said was extremely correct. A life-saving grace should be repaid with one's body. Coincidentally, I have investigated over the past few days and found that my savior is none other than Miss Ron. Aside from the previous rewards, for the second decree, I shall appoint Miss Ron, this savior, as a noble consort." Upon hearing the second decree, I fainted right there in the middle of the hall. Do not worry, it was just low blood sugar, but before I passed out, my mind was filled with the thought, when did I become the emperor's savior? Later, I heard from others that after I fainted, the emperor said I had passed out from excessive joy. My father and his political opponents almost banged their heads until they broke, but they could not stop the emperor from wanting me to enter the palace as a noble consort. What kind of experience is waking up to find oneself a noble consort? Before I could immerse myself in the joy of annulling the engagement with Thomas, I had already begun to pity myself. I suspected the dog emperor was intentionally taking revenge on me, because I knew about the affair between consort Diana and his younger brother, so he appointed me as noble consort. The savior thing must be a complete lie. Aside from dragging that mischievous little boy out of the fire, when had I ever saved anyone else? Wait a minute, could the little boy who fought with me in the study, that snotty-nosed kid, be the emperor? My father sat by my bed, looking at me with teary eyes, and called out weakly, "I am so hungry, my daughter." "Boo-hoo," my father began to wail. "Oh father, your father is still here." My father glared at me with red eyes, and my mother also wiped her tears with a handkerchief. "The palace is a place that eats people without spitting out the bones. You are so foolish, how will you manage once you enter the palace?" I choked and could not say a word. Could it be that in my parents' hearts, I was just a fool without any schemes? My father rolled up his sleeves and angrily said, "No, even if I have to risk this old life, I must make the emperor retract the decree." I looked at the blue bruise on his forehead and fell silent. In recent years, my father had not had an easy time in the imperial court. The Minister of Personnel and his faction frequently tripped my father up. Looking at this old man, half his hair had already turned white. I pulled the old man's sleeve, and then my stomach rumbled loudly. Father, what is bad about being a noble consort? At least I get to eat well and dress well. Let's talk about this later. Right now, can you give me a plate of dongpo braised pork to taste? I feigned illness and lay at home for a few days, and as the day to enter the palace approached, my heart grew calmer. My mother felt sorry for me and advised me to go out and play a bit, as I would not have such freedom once I entered the palace. I thought she was right, so I dragged Daisy to the East Market. While wandering the streets, I saw a very beautiful jade bracelet at a distant stall and was bargaining with the owner. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from beside me. Thomas, this bracelet is truly beautiful. I want this one. Shopkeeper, how much is this? The shopkeeper smiled, his face full of wrinkles. Is this the madam? Oh my, what great eyesight! This bracelet. I interrupted the shopkeeper. Looking at the bracelet in Wendy's hand, I said to the shopkeeper, Shopkeeper, I saw this item first. Business must follow a first come, first served rule. Wendy put the bracelet back with a look of regret and looked at Thomas. It is Miss Ruan. If Miss Ruan likes it, then let her have it. Thomas looked up, discovered it was me, and coughed awkwardly. Miss Ruan, you lack nothing. Why do you still want to snatch things from Wendy? An old woman nearby said, Isn't this General Thomas and strategist Moo? Oh my, they are our heroes. Immediately after, the old woman looked at me with contempt, saying I had no sense of shame to snatch even strategist Moo's items. The old woman had a loud voice, and people heard and joined in. Looking at me with disdain, Daisy argued on my behalf. Pa, clearly, my young lady saw the bracelet first. On what grounds do you say we are snatching? The shopkeeper saw the situation was bad and seized the chance to say, Oh my, young lady, please do not fight with strategist Moo. I have other bracelets here. If you like, I will give you one for free. Is that okay? Hearing the crowd's whispers, I knew that the people's hearts were currently with Thomas, and those who had won the battle, lingering here would bring no benefit. I smiled softly. General Thomas's reputation in the hearts of the common people has now surpassed even the emperor's. General Thomas is truly formidable. Since strategist Moo likes this bracelet, although I arrived first, it is not appropriate for me to seize someone else's favorite, so I shall take my leave. I dragged Daisy, who was cursing loudly, away. I had not checked the almanac before going out today and met these two bad luck bringers. I heard Daisy beside me almost dying of anger, so I lost interest in strolling the streets and stopped by Hongyun Tower, where I usually went to eat dongpo braised pork. As soon as I stepped in the door, coincidentally, I met Thomas and Wendy dining there. Thomas was gently wiping the corner of her mouth with a tender expression. I clicked my tongue from the side. Miss, should we change to another restaurant? Daisy looked at me cautiously. I shook my head, feeling it was just bad luck, but asking myself why I should be the one to yield. Thomas saw me at this moment, his expression tightened, and he became distracted while wiping Wendy's mouth. I pretended not to see him and chose a corner to sit down. A moment later, Wendy whispered a few words to Thomas. Thomas stood up and went out, glancing at me before he left. I was too lazy to look back and ate my appetizer alone. Unexpectedly, Wendy walked over. Time no see. I did not even lift my eyelids. May I ask who you are? Wendy laughed heartily, seemingly aggravating her injury, and coughed twice. Miss Ron is truly a noble who forgets things. Let me introduce myself again. I am Wendy. I continued eating my braised pork, not wanting to pay attention to her. Wendy muttered to herself beside me, Miss Ron, vent your anger, it is what I deserve. I cannot compare to Miss Ron. I have lived in a village since childhood. My father valued sons over daughters, and often beat me for the sake of my trash brother. Later, a famine struck the village, and the family was starving. My father sold me to a 70-year-old man in the village as a concubine for food. I was only 10 years old and did not want to submit to the old man, so I had to poison him and took the chance to run to the village graveyard. I intended to commit suicide, but I met Thomas passing by. Thomas appeared like a celestial being. He saved me and taught me to read and write. For so many years, to stand beside him, I do not know how many nights I stayed up late and woke up early to study military strategy. I thought I could finally marry him, but unexpectedly, Miss Ron appeared. Miss Ron, you have everything. What kind of talented man can you not get? Why must you cling to Thomas? I looked as if I had eaten feces. Did this woman have brain problems? Did she get the strategist job through the back door? With which eye did you see me clinging to Thomas? Wendy sneered. Thomas and I have not left the manor for days because I just recovered from illness. Thomas wanted to take me out for a stroll, but no matter where we went, we met Miss Ron. Is it really such a coincidence? I widened my eyes. Go home and look in the mirror. Who gave you such confidence? Not everyone is like you, hanging themselves on this tree called Thomas. Just how big is your face? Wendy looked unbelieving. I could not explain things to this type of woman whose brain rusted the moment she fell in love. Daisy looked even more disgusted. She pushed Wendy away, barely using any strength. Yet, I saw Wendy act as if possessed by a deity. She suddenly fell to the ground with a pained expression, clutching her chest tightly, and her clothes were gradually stained red with blood. Miss Ron, Thomas only thinks of me as a sister. Please do not be angry. If it quells your anger, hitting me once more is worth it. Thomas threw down the sweets he was holding at the door and rushed over. Wendy, what is wrong? Immediately after, he fiercely slapped Daisy and spoke viciously to me. Mila, I did not expect you to be so vicious. Fortunately, Wendy has a kind heart. While recovering, she even persuaded me not to annul the marriage. I still felt guilty toward you, but seeing you treat her like this is truly disgusting. Seeing blood at the corner of Daisy's mouth, I disregarded everything else and directly slapped Thomas. What are you? You dare to hit my person? While Thomas was stunned, I pulled Wendy out of his arms and slapped her forcefully. And what are you plotting against me here? That day, after I beat the two of them, I knew how the outside world would rumor about me. They said the Prime Minister's daughter admired General Thomas, was jealous of the beautiful love between General Thomas and strategist Mew, caused difficulties for them, and even relied on her status as the future noble consort to viciously beat the two heroes. They also said Wendy and Thomas were a talented man and beautiful woman, a beauty saving a hero, a match made in heaven. Just because of this, my father was impeached by his opponents many times in the past few days, and a chill rose in my heart. There are people who, the more you ignore them, when they bully you, the more they jump around happily, thinking you are afraid of them. On the day I entered the palace, the emperor disregarded the rumors and gave me enough face. He even sent people to carry a 10-mile red dowry procession to my house and personally rode a horse to welcome me. The guards surrounded us tightly inside and out, blocking the curious commoners outside. What was most worth mentioning was that he even called Thomas to stand guard, under the beautiful pretext of ensuring greater safety. The scenes of assassination or taking a blade for someone that I had predicted in stories did not appear at all. Instead, the commoners below rumored that I was a demon consort who failed to seduce Thomas, and then seduced the emperor. The emperor looked at me in my magnificent attire, smiling like a fox. Under everyone's gaze, I slowly removed the veil I had worn for many years. The noisy scene instantly fell silent, followed by a burst of gasps. Even the young eunuch beside me was stunned. Someone muttered, "Indeed a demon consort." The emperor signaled with his eyes, and that person was immediately taken away and disappeared into the crowd. The emperor looked smug. He pushed the young eunuch aside with one hand, embraced my waist, and seemed to speak in Thomas's direction. "Hurry and pay respects to the noble consort." Then a crowd of people knelt down in waves. At that moment, the whole street was filled with chants of, "Long live the emperor, long live the noble consort." Having enjoyed enough glory, I got into the sedan. The emperor held both my hands tightly, looked into my eyes, and said seriously, "Do not be afraid. I will resolve all these rumors for you." I pretended to lower my head shyly, but I felt nothing in my heart. Men's words are good only for listening, especially when he is the emperor. Though he said a heap of words, I did not take them to heart. I turned my head, pretending to look at the scenery to dissolve the awkwardness, only to see Thomas riding a horse beside the sun with a dazed expression. He sensed my gaze and looked over, seeing only my unblemished face, and his expression became even more dazed. I was thinking, this shaking is killing me. I am carsick. The shaking is too strong. The emperor thought I was in a bad mood from leaving home, so he gently patted my back to comfort me. I cannot hold it anymore. I hurriedly grabbed the chamber pot in the sedan and retched loudly. The emperor unexpectedly cried out in surprise, "No way, so fast. I am going to be a father." I really wanted to kick him to death. That night, the emperor held me in his arms, grinning as he asked, "Run away then. You usually run whenever you see me. Why aren't you running now?" I blinked, unable to react in time. Seeing I had no reaction, the emperor pouted, saying it was boring. I directly slapped his thigh. "Your Majesty, let this concubine teach you something good." The emperor rubbed his hands like a fly, looking expectant. The next day, Consort Diana led a group of sisters to pay respects to me. Early in the morning, I supported my aching body, yawning continuously. I did not even hear their sarcastic words clearly and just fell asleep. It was the emperor who arrived in the afternoon and carried me back to bed in front of everyone. After that, the emperor flipped my name tag every night. Excellent. My tag was flipped so much the lacquer peeled off. The rumors outside initially called me a demon consort. I do not know what the emperor did, but the outside world began to say I was the emperor's savior, a different version of General Thomas and strategist Mu's story to life, saving grace repaid with the body. Not only Consort Diana, but even Consort Sarah allied with the harem sisters to deal with me. The me in legends was timid and cowardly, but the m in reality struck with a heavy hand, determined to rectify this harem full of smoke and fire. Two of bamboo. Consort Sarah dramatically reached out her hand to stop me. Oh my sorry, two of bamboo, I win. Consort Sarah had not even touched the tile before I declared my win. Consort Diana looked unwilling and acted pettish with me. Hateful. Why did you win again? It took 3 days for a set of mahjong tiles to turn us from enemies into card buddies. We did not even have time to look for the emperor. Isn't playing cards fun? While we were playing mahjong, the emperor arrived. Consort Sarah and Consort Diana looked pleasantly surprised to see the emperor, especially Consort Sarah, whose gaze was sticky enough to pull threads. Your Majesty, this concubine's palace just stewed fresh wood ear and snow pear soup. Would your Majesty like to come taste it? Your Majesty, this concubine's palace stewed red bean and koik seed soup. Your Majesty, come taste it tonight. I looked at the graceful concubines and momentarily felt interested, so I pinched my throat and feigned a voice, saying, Your Majesty, this concubine has stewed herself into soup. Your Majesty, come taste it. The emperor burst out laughing. Good, then I must taste what flavor the noble consort soup has. During this period in the palace, whenever there was a banquet, I would see Thomas's figure. He always stood not far away, publicly displaying affection with Wendy in front of me, giving me goosebumps. I looked at those two jumping clowns and saw them only as grasshoppers in late autumn, because I had investigated a very important matter. Wendy was a distant cousin of Prince Nathan, and Thomas knew this clearly yet concealed it for her. Furthermore, Prince Nathan seemed to be plotting something big recently, and Wendy had visited Prince Nathan's consort multiple times. These small movements not only alerted the emperor, but even I, deep in the harem, knew clearly. Summer arrived quickly, and the weather was extremely hot. I heard a big piece of news saying that the emperor's younger brother, Prince Nathan, had passed away due to excessive indulgence, dying on a woman's belly. I clicked my tongue in surprise. The royals were indeed strange people. The emperor ordered the imperial household department to add more ice blocks for me to cool down and even brought rare fruits. I was eating mulberries and reading a storybook. Suddenly, someone outside the palace shouted, Noble consort! Noble consort! I asked who dared to yell so loudly at my door. Daisy said it was Consort Diana's personal maid. I ordered her to be let in. As soon as the maid entered, she kowtowed loudly to me. Noble consort, I beg you to save my mistress. I asked her what happened. She stammered that the emperor was furious with Consort Diana and had granted her a length of white silk. Hearing this, I thought of the matters my father had investigated for me recently, and my eyes flashed. As soon as I arrived at the door, I heard Consort Diana laughing wildly. Your Majesty, for so many years, what difference has there been between my life here and the cold palace? You visited me repeatedly only because of pressure from my father. It was Prince Nathan who loved me and cherished me, making me feel a sliver of warmth. Now that Prince Nathan is gone, I have no reason to live in this world anymore. A moment later, I walked in. Seeing me, Consort Diana giggled and said, Being with a king is like being with a tiger. Noble consort, my ending today might be yours tomorrow. I smiled softly. When you first entered the palace, you secretly became pregnant, and that woman named Wendy helped you find a divine doctor to destroy the child. Correct. Consort Diana froze and rushed at me like a madwoman. How do you know? I continued. Prince Nathan was killed for plotting rebellion, right? How much were you involved? Consort Diana. You two thought you were secretive, but your personal maid frequently left the palace. Everyone knows. Now that you are bent on dying, who are you trying to protect? Consort Diana looked terrified. I do not understand what you are saying. I did not bother that she would not tell the truth and turned to leave. Not long after, I heard whispering inside. Consort Diana has passed away. The eunuch's announcement rang out. I suddenly felt cold all over. If one day the emperor's favor was gone, what would my ending be? I needed a child. The death of Consort Diana was announced to the public by the emperor as a sudden illness. After that storm, the emperor rarely came to the harem, spending most of his time in the imperial study dealing with state affairs. Until today, when the emperor held a banquet for the ministers and called me to attend. Halfway through, I felt discomfort in my stomach and wanted to go out for some fresh air, so I informed the emperor. He instructed eunuch David to follow and take good care of me. Unexpectedly, I met Thomas. He seemed to have drunk a bit too much and stood motionless after seeing me. Eunuch David shouted, and he bowed in greeting. His face was gaunt and his demeanor extremely tired. I did not want to get entangled and intended to avoid him, but he called out, "Wait, noble consort, next month I will be getting married." I paused. Then this palace congratulates the general. Does General Thomas have any other business? He took the wooden hairpin from his chest and caressed it. Can the noble consort spare a moment to talk? I was too lazy to pay attention to him. I basically did not want to listen, only the matters I had investigated still made me feel a bit incredulous. I stared into Thomas's eyes and said, "General Thomas, 3 generations of the Wei family sacrificed themselves for the country. The whole family was loyal and righteous. I only hope it will not be ruined in your hands." Thomas panicked for a moment. "This subject does not understand what your highness is saying. I came especially today because I have an important matter to report to your highness." I flung my sleeve. "The harem is not allowed to interfere in politics. You are an outside male, and even more so cannot intrude into the harem at will. If you have an important matter, you should directly seek an audience with the emperor." Thomas sneered. "Indeed, just as Wendy said, you are vain and hypocritical to the extreme." After speaking, he pulled the peace amulet hanging from his neck and threw it down in front of me. I just thought he was neurotic. I kicked the peace amulet into the lake. My words today were not because I was soft-hearted toward Thomas. I just still remembered old General Wei, whose head was chopped off by the enemy and exposed for 3 days. That old man had once held me and had argued with my father until they were red in the face in my father's study. He said, "In this life, if I die, I must die on the battlefield sacrificing for the country." When I returned, the emperor was drunk. I fed him hangover soup. He drank it in one go, greedily smelling the scent on me, looking at me without speaking. I looked at the emperor and asked, "What is wrong?" The emperor carefully asked me, "If one day I leave you alone in a dangerous place, will you blame me?" I was stunned. "Then would your majesty bear to do so?" The emperor leaned in and blocked my lips, murmuring, "Mila, give me a child." One night of spring romance, the day Thomas got married was the time the mutiny began. I did not expect Thomas would ultimately launch a rebellion for Wendy to avenge her cousin. The harem was in chaos. It was said the army outside had killed their way in. The emperor was missing, and I heard the rebel army outside was searching for him. I was preparing to escape the palace, but unexpectedly, the door was pushed open. Outside the door was the emperor. He wore armor, and there was blood on his face. He panted and said to me, "Mila, I have come to get you." I was a bit surprised, actually. That night, when the emperor asked me, I knew he could not take me with him, only I did not expect him to come back. He held my hand, cutting a bloody path. We fought our way through obstacles, and many guards beside him were killed. Finally, only he and I were left. I just numbly let him hold me, until I saw Thomas riding a horse in the distance, wearing a wedding outfit. Behind him was a large army blocking our way. He stared at us. Wendy beside him wore brocade robes. Seeing the emperor, her face was full of hatred. "Dog Emperor, finally found you. If not for you, why would my cousin and consort Diana have lost their lives back then? If I hadn't known my identity, how could I have peacefully developed in the army of my family's sworn enemy? Today I want you to be crushed to pieces." I sneered from the side. "Wendy, stop joking. Years ago, consort Diana clearly could have married Prince Nathan, but she did not want to suffer in the barbaric lands with him, and could not bear to part with the sky, high riches in the palace, so she abandoned your cousin. What does that have to do with the emperor?" The emperor also sneered. "That I kept you until today was my mercy." Prince Nathan appeared to be immersed in wine and women, but in reality, he was full of wild ambition and had long colluded with foreign tribes. "Thomas, previously on the battlefield, why were you able to anticipate the enemy's surprise attacks? Do you think I truly did not know?" Wendy seemed agitated, screaming and ordering Thomas to kill the emperor. Thomas dismounted and drew his sword, walking toward the emperor. Thomas pointed his sword at the emperor. I pulled the emperor behind my back. Thomas looked at me coldly. Move aside, or I will kill you too. Thomas's sword thrust forward. Neither of us could dodge, and we were ready to face death. I was blaming the emperor. Why did he have to come back? If he hadn't returned, they wouldn't have caught him, and this situation wouldn't have happened. The emperor chuckled softly. Mila, I do not regret it. If I had to do it again, I would still choose this. My eyes blurred with tears. Just when I thought both of us were dead for sure, a sound of wind breaking through the air was heard, and Thomas's sword was broken. My father led the army to surround Thomas's troops. My father cursed loudly. Thomas, you animal. The Wei family has been loyal for generations, the whole family martyred for the country, leaving only you. Old General Wei fought on the battlefield all his life. That was his last campaign, yet because there were spies in the army, he suffered the fate of beheading and exposure for 3 days. It was the emperor who personally led the expedition to retrieve the old general's head. Yet you, for a lowly woman, ruined the Wei family. If you go to meet the old general in the future, he will surely beat you to death, you unfilial son. Thomas's eyes were also red as he roared. Impossible. How could there be spies in the army? Prince Nathan clearly told me it was the emperor who feared our merit would overshadow him, so he sent my father to fight and used a scheme to make my father die on the battlefield. The emperor sneered upon hearing this. Thomas, has fighting battles made you lose your mind? At that time, foreign tribes were invading, and the people were suffering. Old General Wei was wholehearted for the people. Late at night, he entered the palace to beg me to send him to battle, wanting to investigate why the army was suffering continuous defeats. The one colluding with foreign tribes was Prince Nathan, and the spy in the army was also connected to him. No matter how foolish I might be, I would not joke with the stability of the realm. The Son of Heaven guards the gate of the country, the sovereign dies for the state. This is the principle of our dynasty's generations, let alone harming loyal officials. Why do you think she could provide you with the enemy's accurate plans? Was it not that they were acting with the enemy, so that today you would point your sword at me? I just did not expect she was Prince Nathan's distant cousin. My father and many old officials can also testify. Wendy panicked. Thomas, they are all lying to you, do not believe them. Have you forgotten how your father died? Wendy kept chattering on the side, but looking at Thomas's expression, he was already wavering. The hand holding the sword was trembling. I looked coldly at Thomas's red eyes. Even if you had doubts, would you not investigate yourself? You are always like this, liking to listen to others, unable to distinguish right from wrong yourself. How can you be worthy of being the great general of our dynasty? I truly feel ashamed for you, and feel it is not worth it for all the common people under heaven. With a clang, Thomas held his head and sat on the ground. Wendy still wanted to struggle. Thomas, you trash. Men, kill them quickly. Kill the emperor and this slut, I will reward you heavily. The tide had turned, and the rebel soldiers dared not move. My father rushed over and had people tie Thomas up. Seeing the emperor and I were fine, only our clothes a bit disheveled. My father breathed a sigh of relief. Wendy was still rambling, cursing loudly. She said she was the noblest woman, that she was about to succeed, having spun the great general around in circles, so why did she fail at this stage? She had become obsessed to the point of madness. Following that rebellion, considering the Wei family's wholehearted loyalty, Thomas was allowed to live, but was demoted to a commoner, while Wendy was sentenced to death. Other officials who participated in the rebellion had their properties confiscated, were removed from office, and all were executed, and their entire clans were exterminated. It was another ordinary day. The emperor rushed over after court adjourned, acting very aggrieved and begging for comfort. He said the historians bullied him, always forbidding him from doing this or that, and complaining that he did not spread his grace evenly across the harem. My emperor. Rumors in the palace said the emperor treated me like a treasure, and I would be the future empress. One day, when the emperor announced in court that he wanted to make me empress, the minister of personnel immediately led the opposition, citing my jealousy, forbidding the emperor from visiting other palaces, and monopolizing the emperor. He said if I became empress, he would smash his head on the pillar and die right there. The emperor pouted and told him, "Then do not wait, just smash your head now." The minister immediately fainted. The emperor also said, "From now on, there will be no more selection of consorts. If they want to select, let them choose for themselves." This action of the emperor shocked the entire court. Even my father wrote a letter asking if I had given the emperor some bewitching potion. I held my forehead but felt a wave of nausea. Daisy looked at me worriedly and invited the imperial physician. Afterward, the news of my pregnancy spread through every alley. The emperor hugged me, cheering like a fool. I am a father, I am a father. I was also very happy. With this child, I also had something to rely on. After becoming pregnant, my morning sickness was severe, but the emperor still stayed at my place every night to take care of me. He even talked to me about having children in the future. A son would be made crown prince, and a daughter would be made the grand princess. I hurriedly knelt to thank him, but he was always unhappy and forbade me from kneeling in the future. Today was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Late at night, carrying my heavy belly, I was gnawing on a mooncake. The emperor mysteriously said he wanted to take me somewhere. He took me to the highest point in the imperial city. From here, one could see the entire night view of the capital. Every household lit Kongming lanterns. For a moment, besides the stars in the sky, there were drifting Kongming lanterns with warm lights, connecting into a galaxy. The flickering candlelight was reflected in the emperor's eyes. He hugged me without saying a word. I tilted my head to look at the emperor. He actually had a strand of white hair, perhaps due to the stress. For the first time, I took the initiative to hold his hand. No matter what the future held, right now, I was willing to watch this prosperous world with him. The story of Mila teaches us a powerful lesson about perception and worth. A veil may hide a face, but rumors cannot define a soul. Thomas's tragedy stems from his shallowness. Blinded by prejudice and manipulated by deceit, he failed to distinguish a true pearl from a fish eye, losing both his honor and his true match. Conversely, happiness belongs to those who possess the wisdom to see beyond the surface and the courage to trust their own heart. Ultimately, dignity and authenticity will always triumph over schemes, and true love requires standing together through the storms of life. The story ends here for now. If it touched your heart or left you thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share Raccoon Tale to help more stories come to life. See you in the next tale.